In the dusty town of Elmridge, nestled at the edge of a vast prairie where the sun bathed the wooden houses in a golden haze each evening, life moved slow like the wheels of a wagon trailing over dry earth, but on one particular day, the lives of many would change because of one unexpected little girl who wandered in with more courage in her heart than most grown men in town. She had no name she would offer at first, only the dust on her boots and the solemn silence in her sky blue eyes that made even the sheriff pause before asking questions. It was old Martha, the baker's wife, who first spotted her sitting alone outside the general store with her arms wrapped around a rough burlap sack, her hair in crooked braids and a single pink ribbon dangling loose like it had long given up. Trying to stay neat, people talked, of course, whispered behind fences and leaned over porch rails, wondering where she came from, if she was one of the orphans from the northern collapse, or maybe the child of drifters who forgot to take her with them when the wind pulled them toward their next whiskey stop. But when old man Clary, the cattle baron whose ranch ran beyond the hills like a kingdom of its own, spotted the girl during his rare walk through town, something strange happened. He stopped and stared, not with the cold eyes of a man used to buying silence, but with a stunned and unfamiliar ache creeping into his expression, as if the girl were a ghost from a life he buried long ago. And it was then that he dropped the brown envelope he'd been clutching, the one filled with payroll notes, and turned toward her slowly, his voice hoarse as he whispered, "Clara?" The name caught the breeze like a lost prayer, and the girl blinked up at him, eyes wide, confused and cautious, but not afraid, as if part of her had been waiting for someone to say it, waiting for someone to recognize her in this land of strangers. And before the crowd could murmur another word, Clary knelt before her, removing his hat, and asked, "Where's your mother, child?" To which she replied, "Gone," in a voice so soft it carried louder than any shout in the gathering silence. What followed was the kind of unraveling only fate could stitch together. Clary took her in that night, and the town watched from windows like birds behind glass as the little girl stepped through the tall doors of the Barcy Ranch, her figure swallowed by the grand halls that hadn't seen a child since Clary's own daughter ran off 20 years ago with a stable boy and never came back, presumed dead after a fire in a border town that took half a street with it and left. No survivors to bury, but now, this girl, she had her eyes, her hair, even the way she curled her hands into tiny fists when nervous, and though Clary said nothing aloud, he ordered his men to find everything about her past, names, towns, border records, and within days a thread of truth emerged: a birth certificate, a witness in a distant town who remembered a woman with the same eyes and a child always asking about horses, a worn journal left behind in a halfway shelter with an address scribbled on the last page. "If anything happens to me, take her to Barcy. She belongs to them." And with those words, Elmridge's quiet life trembled under the weight of a tale unraveling through the desert wind, because now the girl had a name: Lila Clary, granddaughter of the man who built half the county with cattle and silence, and she had come not by mistake, but by the dying wish of the daughter he'd given up on. It wasn't easy, of course. The ranch hands didn't know what to make of her. A girl who spoke little but remembered the names of every horse within days, who didn't cry at night but stared at the stars with a question no one could answer. And when one of the Marais went into early labor, it was Lila who stood by its side for 7 hours, whispering words in a soft language she said her mama taught her. When the foal was born healthy, they began calling her the Little Horse Whisperer, and even the coldest of cowboys nodded with quiet respect whenever she passed. Clary, for all his power, didn't know how to speak to her. Not at first, but slowly, day by day, he began to offer small pieces of his past, stories of her mother's childhood, how she used to climb the windmill and shout poetry into the sky, and how losing her broke something in him he didn't know how to fix. Lila listened, sometimes silently, sometimes with tears, but never once did she pull away, and in time, she began to tell her own stories too, of nights spent under overpasses, of strangers with kind eyes and cruel intentions, of a mother who never stopped singing even when her hands bled from washing floors, and who told her every night before sleep, "You're meant for more than this, baby," and maybe she was, because once the town heard the full truth, they didn't just gossip, they rallied. Miss Grady, the teacher, offered to homeschool her at the ranch. The librarian sent crates of books. The blacksmith's wife stitched her new dresses from scratch. And even the preacher, who once said Clary had no soul left to save, came to pray for the girl's future. Months passed like that, golden and slow, like honey through fingers, and Lila began to smile more, laugh sometimes, and on her 12th birthday, the entire ranch threw a celebration like the town hadn't seen since the war ended, with music, dancing, and a roasted hog Clary had sent for from 3 towns over. He stood that day with a hand on her shoulder, pride swelling in his chest like a second heart, and when she whispered, "Thank you for not sending me away," he replied, "You brought me home," and the crowd grew silent, not because of the words, but because for the first time in 2 decades, Clary smiled, truly smiled, and it was said that night by old Joe, the stable hand, who'd worked there longer than any man still breathing, "Ain't just cattle born on this land anymore. That girl done raised a whole new kind of life out of this dust," and no one disagreed. Time, as it always does, moved on, but the legend of Lila Clary became a tale parents told their children as they tucked them into bed, of a little girl with no voice who found a family without asking, who tamed horses and hearts alike, who reminded an old man what it meant to love, and who proved to a weary town that sometimes hope rides in on the smallest of feet, carrying more truth in a whisper than all the sermons in the world. And when she turned 18, the Barcy Ranch officially passed to her name, not because Clary died, but because he said, "The land belongs to the one who saved it." And with her at the helm, the ranch grew into a home for lost kids, runaway souls and forgotten dreams, each one finding a new chapter between the fences of a land once thought barren, and through it all, Lila never forgot the dust, the silence, the hunger, or the fire in her mother's voice that told her she was meant for more, because she was and because she still is. Years passed, and under Lila's leadership, the Barcy Ranch evolved from a cattle empire into something far more profound, a sanctuary for broken spirits, wandering children, and forgotten dreams that seemed to drift across the plains like tumbleweeds, waiting for someone to catch them before they vanished. Word spread far beyond Elmridge, across counties and eventually into state lines, about the girl who grew up among horses and dust and turned sorrow into shelter, pain into purpose, and silence into song. Every month, another child would arrive, by train or by horse cart or on foot, escorted by sheriffs, social workers, and sometimes complete strangers who had read about her in dusty newspapers or heard the story, whispered in diners and rest stops across the prairie. And each time, Lila would be there at the gate, standing tall in boots too worn to shine, with braids tucked back and eyes as fierce as any storm, greeting the lost with a nod and a simple, powerful phrase, "You're safe now." Among those who came was Jonah, a boy of 12 with burns on his arms and a hatred of fire so deep he couldn't sleep without the lights on. And there was Emily, a mute girl who clung to a ragdoll and hadn't spoken in 2 years until she saw Lila calm a wild colt with nothing but a whisper. She started talking that night, one sentence at a time, and never stopped after. There was even a teenage boy named Caleb, tall, angry, and quick to throw punches, who tried to run away the first 3 times but stayed the 4th after Lila gave him a job fixing the barn roof and told him, "No one here's afraid of your pain." These weren't just acts of kindness. They were echoes of Lila's own journey, as if every child that arrived filled a piece of the emptiness she once carried, making her stronger, steadier, and even more determined to carry on what she now saw as a calling, not an accident. Clary, now an old man with slower steps but clearer eyes, watched her with a mix of pride and awe, knowing he had found redemption not in the church or in the whiskey he once turned to, but in the granddaughter he almost never knew he had once. Tried to build a legacy with land and cattle, but she was building one with love, and it reached farther than any fence he'd ever put up. And the town of Elmridge, too, changed with her businesses flourished. The school expanded, and even the once distant mayor began funding a monthly supply wagon to the ranch, calling it a partnership, though everyone knew it was gratitude in disguise. The old preacher who once scorned Clary now knelt every Sunday to bless the children of Barcy, and every child, no matter how broken they arrived, left a little more whole, not because of miracles, but because Lila had created something rare. A place where hearts were tended like crops, against the doors, winds howled through the gaps in the walls, and with Caleb and fixed it with Bear.